Welcome back to the Done Deal Show. I'm joined as ever on another beautiful Thursday morning by the wonderful Ben Jacobs. How are you, my friend?
Very well. Apologies, we're late. It was because me and Terry were deep in negotiations over whether I could or couldn't wear this Christmas jumper. And I think we're close enough. So here it is.
Yes, here it is. We are there. We're in the home straight. It's nearly a total agreement for the Ben Jacobs jumper today. Let us know what you think of it as well. What are we rating the jumper out of 10? You need to know, out of 10, what are we ranking that today? Big show ahead. Lots of different stories to talk about. We're going to be giving updates on Jude Bellingham and Maddison and Griezmann, but also talking Cristiano Ronaldo. Where is he going to go if he leaves in January? Saliba and Saka's new deals. And of course, the big one, which I think everybody's very intrigued about at the moment, Todd B doing God's work again, early deals. Christopher Nkunku on his way to Chelsea. A lot of people think that's very close, or it is close. When do you feel that will happen? And do you think it will happen?
Well, first of all, yes, I think it will happen. The advantage that Chelsea have got in this deal is that they're prepared to pay more than the release clause, which becomes active next summer and is 60 million euros. So Chelsea, by paying more money, gain two advantages. One, they can get the deal wrapped up now and thus jump ahead of any prospective battle in around about a year's time. And two, they can change the payment terms. So if you wait for the release clause and you activate that, then that has to be paid in one lump sum. If you negotiate for higher than the release clause or any kind of other deal, then Chelsea have the opportunity to determine the structure of that deal, which can be more beneficial to them comparative to how the payment terms for the release clause are laid out. So Chelsea did undertake a secret medical somewhere near Frankfurt. The keyword is secret, which is why Leipzig are denying it, but there were definitely Chelsea staff there present. And you don't do that medical unless you're moving things along in the right direction. So as I understand it, there is a pre-agreement in place between Nkunku and Chelsea. It is not legally binding, nor is it exclusive at this stage. But as soon as all of the final formalities and negotiations are undertaken between Chelsea and Leipzig, then Nkunku will be able to sign. And at that point, the deal will be lined up for a year's time. Now, the Chelsea challenge is that until things become 100% official, it's now out there. And if there are any other rival suitors that wish to take the same approach, there's nothing stopping them. But Chelsea are very confident. There's no problems whatsoever between Nkunku and Chelsea. And they also have a good relationship with Leipzig as well. He obviously scored last night and he had this loud goal as well, which was a lovely composed kind of chipped finish. And that was kind of a microcosm of exactly why Chelsea like the player. So this is one, I think, that from Chelsea's point of view, they're still going to try and keep under wraps. And due to the dynamic of the deal, and because they're not, as things currently stand, looking to bring him in January, they will try and keep this one under the radar until, I think, at least the early part of next year. And then we may see an announcement, or they might even try and wait a year until they get to a point where he can actually join. But we've seen this kind of mold with Naby Keita when he joined Liverpool. And if you can get your business done early and put a pre-agreement in place and then turn it into a binding deal, then instead of having a mad scramble in the market, instead of doing what Chelsea did in the last window and having to chase after multiple targets with time running out, they can get a big name in place early. And with Gvardiol as well, that is what they're working on too. And with Alvarez at Ajax, it's the same kind of thing, that they're not thinking about scrambling anymore as they were towards the end of the window for some kind of midfield option. They're saying, right, that was the tester. Todd Bowley's been interim. Now we've got more time. Let's put a strategy behind it so it isn't chaos, so it isn't a scramble. And I think that is going to reflect over the January window and the summer that Chelsea are going to get their business done earlier. And now they're developing contacts, and now they're making recruitments. Everything about what they do is still going to be exciting and ambitious, but it's going to be far more structured. And I do fully expect Nkunku to join as things currently stand.
I think what really stands out to me there, Ben, of course, Nkunku, such a talented player. Did a bit of scout watch last night, watched him in the Leipzig game, and he scored one brilliant goal that was just offside. Moments later, scores another, so influential. A high goal output, high level of assists over the last few years as well. He's a star playing that secondary striker role. You know, the Mounts and the Kai Havertz have been struggling there, so it's almost a case of, you know, they're going to go out and keep improving the squad. But the bit, and I know that rivals hate when I use this now, I get called out all the time, but the scary element for me as a United fan is what you said at the end there. No more scrambling. They want structure. They're working on multiple deals for next summer in October. And I know that you know as well as I do that a lot of transfers don't start on the 1st of June. A lot of transfers, the work goes in weeks and months prior. So that isn't out and out new. But I think that this kind of weird thought that Todd Bowley and this group were just going to basically act like yahoos, and it was going to be messy and uncontrolled forever, just because the first summer felt a little bit like that. I just thought people were almost deluding themselves into thinking that this group of individuals who are highly successful at what they do, that are looking to put all the right building blocks in place, were not going to get it right to a degree. And I think that for me, looking in, I look at the way Chelsea are operating and the direction they're moving in. If they get this right, they're going to create they're already a powerful club, but I think they can go to another level. And for the first time, I would say, since Roman took over, I think they could create continuity shrouded with the money and the level of investment they're looking to make. And it sounds like things are really moving in the right direction with Chelsea football.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And they're not doing as much new or novel as perhaps the media and some football fans think. And naturally, when Todd Bowley speaks for effectively the first time, and that was at a conference in New York, everyone picked up on the All-Star game, or the fact that he wrongly said Mo Salah, for example, had come through the Chelsea academy. And all of that's fine for people from the outside in to attack Chelsea for, or to use as fuel to suggest that these Americans somehow don't understand Chelsea and football. But it's nonsense. And if you look at behind the scenes, the hard work that they are doing, they've moved in two directions. They've not got everyone in place yet, but they've moved in two broad directions. One is more data, and two is a desire to build structure, which eventually will manifest in a multi-club model. And when they get that, not only will they have an ability to provide better pathways and lure talent at all levels and ages, and from their point of view, hopefully they end up in the Chelsea first team. And if they fail, as I've said many times before, they're still sellable at profits, but they'll also be able to track data. And when we talk about data, there's always a lack of understanding as to what that entails, because it's not only data to scout a player or data to monitor a player's development. It's data to make a projection on how much a player might improve. It's data to look at any injury predictions or preventions. And each aspect that data is used for provides you either with a marginal gain that can be the difference between winning a Premier League or only finishing in the top four, or a major gain because you might unearth a talent using it. So the broad array through which data can be used is so important, and it has to be connected through an entire football club from youth level all the way up to first team. And that's what the best clubs do well. So then when you look at what Chelsea are doing, they are talking to Red Bull. Why? Because they want to put an emphasis on youth, but they're also looking at the Manchester City mold, which is why they've brought in Tom Glick as their president of business operations, which effectively is a CEO role. They've got Toby Craig coming in as their director of corporate affairs, also from the City Group as well. So what you can see is that Chelsea appreciate the history and the football side that they've inherited, but they want to revolutionize the brand and the model. And that means renovating the stadium. It means being more global, which will have commercial benefits. And it means partnering, whether formally or non-formally, with other football clubs to create better pathways. So then when you do spend on players, you've got a higher percentage chance of them succeeding because you can bring them through your system, not somebody else's system. And that is ultimately the Chelsea plan. And when it is set out in those terms, That's nothing new. It's exactly what the City Group are doing. It's exactly what the Red Bull Group are doing. But you've got their level of ambition and you've got their financial muscle. And naturally, Manchester City had that as well when their model was first built. And look at them now. They're absolutely flying as both a football club and a group. And Chelsea will be exactly the same thing. But I think you made a key point, Terry, that transfer windows don't happen when the window opens anyway. And that's not just Chelsea, that's every club. So to say like Chelsea are working on Nkunku now or Gvardiol now, they're breaking the mold, that again is incorrect. Every single football club is working windows ahead. It's the only way you get a player. If you want Bellingham, then you have to start now, and arguably you had to start a year ago. And that is why Liverpool and Real Madrid are currently the front runners. And some clubs do that better than others. Manchester United and probably Chelsea historically, not as good at planning in a structured way, multiple windows ahead. But part of that, again, is because if you don't have the data and if you don't have that ability to track a player at 14, 16, 18, and if you're not consistent about it, and then if you don't combine the data with the gut instinct, with the scouting, with the personal relationships that you develop, then you never get the full picture. And I've said this many times that the reason why Liverpool in particular, but also the City Group are so good is because they put in that time and energy and investment to get the full picture, to judge a player on the marginal gains as well as the obvious stuff, and to ensure that it's all logged, it's all connected, and it's all comparative. And comparative is also really key, by the way, too, because sometimes you'll scout a player and use data just as a yardstick. You might go after a name to get a price or to get data. So when you want your other name and they're at a much higher price, you say, well, listen, there's two players we're looking at. They're both like for like. They're like for like on data. They're like for like on age. They're like for like on potential. And then you may say, well, actually, we're either going to go for the other one because the price is so much cheaper and we think they've basically got the same potential. Or you might do the opposite and you might leverage the one you don't really want. And you might go to the other club and say, listen, we can either get this guy for 15 million or we can bid for the player at your club for 50 million. And we know you want to sell them. And you know, and we know that they're basically exactly the same. And then you get a reduction on the price. So again, data can actually be used in the negotiation process as well as kind of part of the poker game. And Chelsea are basically playing catch up behind the scenes with their foundational core. And the honest truth is that Manchester United need to do the same.
Yeah, no, listen, I couldn't agree with you more. And, you know, I've been speaking about this for such a long time now, not just with Chelsea, but in general, and looking at the way the best clubs operate, sometimes pound for pound, sometimes on the same level. And someone once said to me, you'll never be able to recreate what Fergie did at Man United. And I disagree, but you just do it in a different way. You create Man United worked so well under Fergie because the club was run in his image. But the problem was he was in control of it. So when he leaves, you lose that figurehead. So all you need to do is create that at a club level that transcends and continues beyond any one particular manager or head coach, however your club names them. And it was my one biggest bugbear with Roman. I used to look at what he did and thought the money you spend is great. You buy brilliant players, you bring in brilliant managers, but it was always a little bit too knee-jerk when things got bad. And there wasn't always continuity from manager to manager to manager. And then I saw the way City, as an example, developed, and they just operated differently to Chelsea while spending big. And I think there was always this kind of, and I do blame some of the big mainstream media outlets for not educating fans on this, but there was just a view that City are doing what Chelsea did and they're just spending money. Well, and actually, when you looked beneath the surface and how they were building the club, there were such key fundamental differences. And you've seen the way Brighton operate as a great example. They're, for me, pound for pound, the best run club in the league, or one of them, with the way they operate from, you know, their girls under nines team will play the same style as football as the men's team. They only loan players out to clubs that play a similar style of football. So there's this cohesion and everything else. And I look at Man United as an example, and I'm sure Chelsea have gone through this. I guarantee it, because I've seen the Chelsea's academy play. Their academy would play one style of football that was the complete opposite from how the current first team manager operated. So there was no easy transition for an 18, 19-year-old lad to go from being in the academy to suddenly playing in a very pragmatic style with three at the back when he'd been playing 4-3-3 in the academy for like 6 years. It used to blow my mind that people couldn't see that. So yeah, I think what the Bowley group are doing is sensational. Changing the subject very quickly, though. These are great ratings, Ben. Nine out of 10. We've got
Oh, wow.
a 10 out of 10. Great jumper here. Mama Flossie, it says 7. So a little bit of a Len Goodman there, a little bit of a 7. Crispy 7. Our Shareem here looks like a 10. Ben Jacobs is a fashion icon. Another one there. And this is my favorite here from Gavman. 11 out of 10. 11 out of 10 for the jumper, Ben. Look at that.
Wow. Are we sure? Are we positive in the chat here that these ratings, other than the 11 out of 10, are not out of 100?
It could be. With Ability coming with a 5, it's still not bad. Ola here has gone with a 9. So yeah, lots of good votes. 9.5 here. Like loads of good votes there.
Wow, near perfection.
It's they're definitely looking at it. But yeah, look, Chelsea on the up. Has there been any updates at all yet about Fofana's injury, or are they waiting on scan results still for that?
Still scan results. He left on crutches. Obviously, it doesn't look good. But by the same token, when a player's still at the stadium come full time, leaving on crutches, that's still more preferential to leaving during the game straight for a hospital visit. So that is the tiny silver lining. But Graham Potter said late last night that he gets the scans this morning. So presumably in the next few hours, at least internally anyway at Chelsea, they'll have an update.
There we go. I mean, it'd be a big shame for him if that was to happen. Still to come on the show, people, we are going to talk Saka and Saliba. So stay with us if you're here for that news. Don't go anywhere else. Please make sure like buttons are being smashed. That's very important to YouTube channels, that like buttons are hit, and that you subscribe and turn on the bell notification button as well. A quick pit stop at Man United. Ronaldo, since last week, over the weekend, big talk of him leaving in January, wanting to get out. There's still sort of loose links I see on socials to the likes of Chelsea. Could that be where it happens? But what's your latest understanding of Ronaldo's future at Manchester United?
Things have flipped in a perverse way, and they'll change again, no doubt, when the window opens. But we started the summer with Ronaldo wanting out and Manchester United being adamant that he was not for sale. And now within Manchester United, there is a private acceptance, particularly driven by Ten Hag, that Ronaldo can go in January. And yet at Ronaldo's end, things are a whole lot calmer. He now has to focus on the World Cup and he needs game time. And he's in a very paradoxical situation in that respect, because he can't get anywhere before the World Cup. So he needs to try and force his way into more regular Manchester United game time. So he's at his peak for the World Cup. And although he said that he'll play on beyond the World Cup in the Euros, this is last World Cup. So that's the priority for Ronaldo. And the paradox lies in the fact that if he succeeds and is playing regularly for Manchester United and finds the goal scoring form of last season, then his perspective in January might well be different to Manchester United's perspective, especially if Manchester United become in a healthy position in the table in the midway point of the season. Because Ronaldo has nothing against Ten Hag or Manchester United. He wants Champions League football. So imagine a scenario where, even though it's a leap at the moment, he plays, he scores, Manchester United finish October, November before the break strongly. He has a great World Cup. Yes, that puts him in the shop window, but he comes back. And Manchester United suddenly say, well, now you're playing, now you're scoring, now we're fourth or better in the table. All of this, of course, is only a hypothetical. It is all a stretch at the moment. It's probably more likely that Ronaldo is used as a bit part player on the bench and Mendes has to try and look for another club for him. But that's Ronaldo's perspective, and it's different to the football club. He needs to be a leader. He needs to be positive. And I've been told by sources close to Ronaldo that things are very calm at his end. So even if Manchester United are more of the belief that they would now let him go in January, Cristiano Ronaldo just wants to do his best for Manchester United. He's training like a professional. He's trying to force his way into the first team. And that is why the Ten Hag comments in the Ronaldo camp have not gone down well from the Manchester derby. And something may have been lost in translation, but for a manager to publicly admit that he did not bring on Cristiano Ronaldo to protect, quote, his big career as a sign of respect, to stop him from being humiliated in some respect, is a very bizarre logic. And I know there were other factors like Martial and so on, so you have to take the comments in their full context. But for a manager to even say that, I found staggering, because Cristiano Ronaldo would not have wanted, even with Manchester United down 4-0 at half-time and eventually losing 6-3, to just sit there and watch. And if you've got a plan for Ronaldo, regardless of the context, regardless of whether he could or couldn't have influenced the game, let's be honest, it's damage limitation at 4-0 in a Manchester derby. You've got absolutely nothing to lose by chucking on Ronaldo and saying, go out there and get us a scoreline that is more respectable. And if he scores, if he does something, then he makes a statement, because I guarantee you then some parts of the Manchester United fan base would be saying, well, look, when Ronaldo's on the field in a big game like that, he made a difference. Naturally, there's a flip side. Lots of Manchester United fans would say he wouldn't have made a difference. But if he gets that opportunity with freedom and effectively nothing to lose, and he does make a difference, then to me, that's very positive for the relationship of Ronaldo and Ten Hag and for Manchester United. But by leaving him on the bench with nothing to lose, you never know. And then to reason that it's somehow down to a respect for Ronaldo, I think that just further damages the relationship between Ten Hag and Ronaldo, because I know for a fact from talking to those in day-to-day contact with Ronaldo that he was not happy about that reasoning. He's fine with being left on the bench, but he was not happy with that reasoning. And then just coming back to the question quickly on Chelsea specifically, we still know Todd Boehly likes Ronaldo. If he has a good World Cup, he's in the shop window. Thomas Tuchel is not there anymore. So a lot is down to just, again, that word structure. Chelsea needs sporting director, probably technical director. Kyle McCauley, recruitment specialist, is in Chelsea, and Graham Potter. If two of those four, so one from the Potter camp, McCauley or Potter, and one from sporting director and or technical director, buys into Boehly's belief that Ronaldo is worth it still after the World Cup, then I still think that there is a chance, even with Aubameyang there, that Chelsea will enter the race for Cristiano Ronaldo. But again, to reiterate, Ronaldo's priority now, unlike perhaps Ten Hag's, is not, I repeat, not to move away from Manchester United. Ronaldo's priority, as I understand it, is 1, World Cup. And how can he have the best World Cup? 2, by getting back into the Manchester United side. If that comes together for him and he's playing for Manchester United and he has a good World Cup, there is nothing to suggest that Ronaldo won't U-turn and say, well, hang on, I'm now playing for Manchester United. I've had a good World Cup. They're on course, if he's playing well, potentially for Champions League football. That might change the perspective. So it's a case of wait and see. But Manchester United's position on Ronaldo is that he can leave in January. Ronaldo's position on leaving is not as fervent as it was when the transfer window first opened.
Well, what a turn of events. I mean, as you say at the start there, that to go from it being the other way around in the summer, it's one of those things for me. I remember saying in the summer, and I praise some of the good work that Man United did in the summer, and I'll always do that. But this was one that I said back then, and I got called a negative Nelly and toxic and divisive. I simply stated that I think keeping Ronaldo will end in this kind of situation. And already, I think Ten Hag doesn't want to be the kind of manager that is harsh. And I think he did get his words wrong. With reflection, looking back, he should have just said that I'm saving Ronaldo. I'm saving Ronaldo because he's starting Thursday. That would have been a much better answer, in my opinion. Instead, the whole protecting his career legacy. What I actually think he feels is, I thought Martial would have more of an impact. That's it. And I don't think he wants to say that because he doesn't. And I agree with that because I don't like the way Conte spoke about Matt Doherty the other day. I think that's really disrespectful. Am I stupid? I don't want to lose. Anything like that you do, I think is wrong. And it's interesting now. I think maybe Ten Hag's had a longer look at him in training and he's thinking, I know he's Cristiano Ronaldo by name, but he's not Ronaldo by nature anymore. He is, for me, I think he's just, I'm not going to ask your age on camera, but I know when I hit a certain age, and I know I'm not a professional athlete, but your body just starts to change, even if you're still training, even if you're taking care of yourself. And I feel like Ronaldo's has gone through a change and he just isn't quick enough and sharp enough anymore. He'll score some goals this season. He might score goals tonight. We're playing an absolute minnow, so he should. But yeah, I feel like it's right to try and move him on. But the biggest mistake here was not helping him out the door in the summer. And I know there was the talk of no clubs wanted him, but I think if Man United would have turned around and made it possible, maybe by saying, listen, buy him, pay him 200 grand a week, we'll cover the other 260,000, whatever it may be. United are going to have to take a financial loss here again, But I think having him around is going to end up causing more problems than it's going to fix. And that's not a dig at Ronaldo or Ten Hag. It's just, what's the expression? Oil and water. I just think that's all it really is. There's no issue with either of them, but together I think it's going to be a little bit of a problem there. But viewers, what do you think about Ronaldo? Should the club look to move him on? Should he be given more time? A lot of people are, by the way, that is KJ commenting from the Football Terrace account. So don't misconstrue that as my opinion. It's KJ. Use your own account, KJ, because people think it's me and I get crap for your opinions. Someone said to me the other day, they were like, how dare you say that? And I was like, I didn't say anything. I very rarely make comments while I'm live streaming. And then I went back and looked. I'm like, it's KJ. KJ's getting me in trouble. But there we go. Hit the like and share button for us as well, my people. People are dense. Well, they're not dense. They just think it's me. I hear you, KJ. I hear you, bro. A player that a lot of people are talking about, Man United have also now been heavily linked to, but so is everybody, is the brilliant, the majestic Jude Bellingham. Goal and an assist last night in the Champions League. He seems to be he's getting strength to strength. What's your latest understanding of him, and who are the Premier League front runners in your opinion to sign him?
Liverpool are the front runners in the Premier League, and Real Madrid are with them in the race outside of the Premier League. But as you say, there's lots of clubs that naturally are tracking Bellingham. Manchester City are in there. Chelsea will enter the race more seriously. Manchester United are also on the radar too. And I think that this is just normal because you've got somebody who's 19 years of age who has scored now in 3 straight Champions League games, captained his team as well at the age of 19, the youngest Champions League captain. So what are you getting in Bellingham? You're getting a phenomenal talent. You're getting a goal scorer. You're getting a leader. You're getting a creative player. You're getting somebody that is tough, both physically and mentally. And perhaps most importantly, you're buying somebody now that could well give you the best part of 10 years, if not slightly more even, at their absolute peak. And this is why figures are being bandied around of well in excess of 100 million. And at the moment, the price could even be as high as 125 million. So there's a lot of different things at play here. Number one is that Dortmund are not ruling out a new deal in January. And that's important because the new deal doesn't mean anything in terms of Bellingham and when he'll leave. The summer is still the target for all of these clubs. But as with Nkunku, signing a new deal does 2 very important things. One, it raises the price or it protects the value. And then why would the player agree to that? Well, of course, because between whenever they sign the new deal and whenever they leave, they're on improved terms. And if that is a very short period of time, such as January to the summer, then from Bellingham's point of view, it gives him an extra chip to negotiate with. Because if suddenly the new deal elevates the wages to, let's just say, 450,000 quid a week, when you negotiate with clubs that want you, you ask for that on a par as far as your personal terms are concerned. So the player's agent will often encourage the player to sign, even though it actually then means that the clubs chasing after that player will have to pay a little bit more. But it can guarantee the player gets amply rewarded in the second half of the season, but also goes to a new club on even better terms because it's never going to be a pay cut. So that's quite interesting. And obviously from the point of view of the selling club, if they know that the player is going to leave, they can afford that spike in wages because they're well aware that it's only going to be for a matter of months. So that's kind of one backdrop just to think about, because that will alter the price that we're now going to talk about. But as things stand, without him signing a new deal, Real Madrid feel like they're in the ear of the player. And they believe that him not signing a new deal is all part of a long-term plan to get him over to La Liga by the summer. And they think they have done the legwork. And I can tell you that Ancelotti has had a direct conversation with the player, and they are constantly over watching him and developing relationships, because signing a player of Jude Bellingham's quality is about all kinds of things. including making the player feel welcome away from football, showing him where he's going to live, telling him about the perks away from playing, introducing him to other people that are his age that he might develop relationships with. Because players like that, especially the big names, they want to know that they're walking into a dressing room where they're going to have a few relationships, where they're going to feel at home, where they know who they're going to be living next door to. And fans listening may say, well, how's that relevant? They're going to judge it based on how well the team's playing and who pays the most. But it's all these little marginal things. And Liverpool in particular and Real Madrid do that so well. They make sure that they spend time with the family, not just the player. They spend that extra day overnight. They travel to smaller teams on away days to almost show a commitment that we've traveled not just to your home games, not just to your big games, but we've gone to your away games and we've sat with your family in the away end, and we've maybe not even spoken about the deal. It's all just about fostering those personal relationships that then add to the decision making. And if you look at Erling Haaland, what did he say when he joined Manchester City, or what has now become apparent? He had a scoring system. So coming back to what we were talking about with data before, it's not only the clubs using data, it's the players and their agents. And Haaland had a scoring system. So he made the decision a bit less personal, and Bellingham may do the same. He might line up all of his options and say, who's put in the most commitment? Who does my family like the most? Who has shown me the most about where I will be living? Which dressing room is the friendliest? Who's invited me into a WhatsApp group with players that are my age, and so on. And that is the human aspect to a deal. And there may well be a score or an influence based on that. And that's what Liverpool do brilliantly. They put in so much time and effort behind the scenes that is unsung, that ends up helping them get a player. And that was a factor, for example, in the Darwin Núñez deal. So Liverpool are there, and they believe that they can get Bellingham for around about 100 million at the moment. But if he signs a new deal, it may be influenced. Real Madrid think they can negotiate around about 85 to 90 million. So even cheaper. And those two are out there at the front. But then with Manchester City, they are entering the race. They have not put in the same legwork. But Erling Haaland has already told Jude Bellingham that he should join Manchester City. And whether or not an ex-teammate has too much credence, there's plenty in the England camp that can also influence Bellingham as well. But Manchester City are there. And then Chelsea will be a bit later into the race. But I think the advantage they will hold is that they're prepared to pay bigger. And also they are prepared to structure the deal in a way that is massively beneficial to Dortmund. But they still would have to get the player buy-in, which is why they are further behind in the race. And Manchester United believe that they can also be a serious contender. But one thing I would say finally on this is that Bellingham wants instant Champions League football. So where Manchester United are come January, as he starts to think about his decision, is going to be important. Because if they're 6th, 7th in the table, if it's not guaranteed, at that point, they will be out of the race, assuming Bellingham goes in the summer, because he will not move to a club that will not give him Champions League football instantly in the 23-24 season.
And that makes perfect sense. And I think that in terms of whether, and I think the same thing goes for Liverpool. And I think this is why Liverpool fans have got to be putting pressure on the club to buy in January. Pressure maybe on Klopp to change systems, drop a few players that are underperforming, because as great as Liverpool have been, if Bellingham suddenly looks at it and says that you're on a decline, if the unthinkable happened and they didn't make the top 4, they're not going to go there. And Liverpool are a little bit of a skinflint club at the highest level anyway. They don't like to spend as much if they can. They love to structure the wages different. A lot of it's incentive based. So they have to be in a very strong position. And I think, I do feel like Chelsea could be a very, very, I think Chelsea could be very potent in this if they start to improve rapidly under Potter, look dangerous, spending other money. City are always going to be key influences, but then it depends on what midfielders are at the club next year and the position that he's going to play, because that's the slight disadvantage City have is they already have so much quality. Am I going to play straight away? You look at Real Madrid and think, imagine that in just say 3 years time. Imagine Camavinga Tchouaméni and Jude Bellingham. You look at that as a midfield. I mean, there are a certain demographic of world football that will be very triggered by those three young men delivering. There's a part of me that actually wants to see that. Not see them get angry, but like see a group like that deliver and be the best midfield in the world. But I think Chelsea, I wonder what, I mean, Arsenal are not linked to him, but if Arsenal keep improving and moving forward the way they are this year, I mean, could Arsenal enter the race and have a chance of getting him if they're title contenders back in the Champions League?
I don't think so. For some reason, they've got other priorities, and that might be because of the price tag. Although, as you say, if you qualify for the Champions League, you get that windfall. You have the ability to use a bit more financial muscle in the market. And we know that Arsenal would like, in an ideal world, to still strengthen in that position. It might also require, over the course of the next 2 windows, an outgoing as well, but let's see. But at the moment, they haven't entered the race. They've got other priorities. And with Chelsea, it's the same. And that's what's so interesting about Chelsea needing a sporting director, or needing Kyle McCauley and Graham Potter. McCauley, for those that are unaware, is Potter's personal recruitment specialist. He obviously works for Chelsea, but I think it's fair to say if Potter ever left Chelsea, McCauley would always follow him. And that is partially why Chelsea want to build their own team of sporting director, technical director, recruitment specialists. So then you kind of get the manager perspective, but you protect the structure of the club at the same time in case your manager ever left. And Chelsea need to decide, because with Bellingham, he is somebody that they appreciate, but Declan Rice has always been their priority. And with Arsenal, again, there's been other names that they have looked at, not Jude Bellingham for now, but it's kind of one of those when he's only 19 and he's getting better game on game on game. And now we're seeing what he can do from a leadership point of view. So it's not a case of any club ruling out Jude Bellingham, which is why it's such a crazy race with probably a big transfer fee. I personally don't believe Real Madrid will get him for 85 million, even with player buy-in, because each day, each week, each month between now and when he finally leaves, there will be more and more elite clubs entering the race. And the reason for that is because if you liked him but didn't want to bid for him, which is, say, Arsenal's position, you might change your mind over the next year, because you're going to see him probably have more games as captain. You're going to see him more in the Champions League. He's going to turn 20, and then you're going to see that development, that maturity, that consistency. There is a sky-high potential for him to develop. This isn't a 23-year-old where you say he'll probably level off. He's at his peak. It's a world-class peak. He's going to continue. We don't know how far he can go. And I think that the fact he has that leadership at 19, that maturity at 19, that creativity, that goal scoring, under the right coach and under the right system and style for club and country, there is still that sky-high potential. And that's why you're going to get more and more suitors joining the race. And I think nobody really that is an elite level club doesn't want Jude Bellingham. There's just some that have either got another priority or have decided that the price is too high.
Yeah.
And the latter's a really key point with a club like Arsenal, because if they've decided the price is too high, but they see him get more and more consistent and offer all of these things on and off the football field alongside what we know he can do with the ball, at that point they might say, if they get Champions League football, you know what? It's worth paying above market value, or it's worth paying 130 million. We'll find that money at the expense of an outgoing or the expense of another target. But right now, to my understanding, Arsenal are not in the race for Jude Bellingham, but that doesn't mean that things won't change once we get beyond the World Cup. And if he continues doing incredible things in Champions League games and at domestic level.
Yeah, and I think obviously Arsenal just, and people in the comments saying, why did I bring Arsenal into the conversation? I think it's relevant based on the fact that Jude's going to pick partly based on personal preference and who puts the most effort into him and everything else, but there's a scoring system, and that scoring system changes over the course of the season depending on the direction and trajectory of football clubs. And I think this is where Arsenal and everybody in terms of the money needs to be careful. 2 summers ago, when Lukaku joined Chelsea, there was early talk in the window of Chelsea looking at Erling Haaland. And of course, after it didn't happen, there was Haaland was never that interested in Chelsea, and Chelsea weren't that interested in him. But I wonder now, with hindsight, if Chelsea could go back to that same summer, how much now they'd be willing to pay just to get him, or any club? How much money would football clubs now be willing to pay for Erling Haaland to be their striker? Would they remortgage the house essentially to get it done? And I always give that analogy because I always remember when I first joined the bank, they were talking about home insurance, and this guy made this claim that when you're talking, one of the sales techniques they taught us was to basically say to people, and we did it in a much better way than this, but if your house burnt down, how much money would you be prepared to pay to get all your items back? And people would always say, 50 grand, 100 grand. So, yeah, £2.70 a month and you can insure it all, right? It was a silly sales technique that worked. And that's how I feel about these circumstances. And I think with Jude Bellingham, some clubs might go 100 million is too much. But if he signs for Liverpool for 100 million, and then for the next 6, 7, 8, 9 years is just colossal week in, week out, you're going to look back and go, he was actually a bargain at that money. And that's the risk of not getting him, is how much better he can make a competitor. So I think the race for Bellingham this summer is going to be absolutely, what I hope, though, I hope it's a summer saga. I hope that it's not agreed in the April. Actually, I want a bit of fun with it. I want Ben on every week in a different jumper with us working out where he's going. It'll be a lot of fun.
I will find maybe a yellow and black jumper for next time to kind of be Dortmund themed. One quick thing I'll say, even though it sounds really pessimistic, because it suggests at some point that a player you want for a massive price either won't work or will leave, is just the age. So as per Haaland and people already talking about a Real Madrid move, even though Pep has denied any kind of exit clause. Let's say you buy Bellingham now for 130 million, which is close to the price at the highest end at the moment that is being quoted. And let's say he is absolute box office for 5 seasons. Then at that point, he either A, might want a fresh challenge, in which case you may be forced to sell him. And in all likelihood, that 130 million that you've paid will either be refunded in inverted commas, or you make a profit off him. And he'll still only be, let's just call it 25 years of age. Or everything works out perfectly and you keep the player for the best part of 10 years. And when he's 29 or 30, there may be an eventuality where an elite level club says, we're going to replace Jude Bellingham. Or alternatively, somebody comes in and Bellingham again says, I'm only a bit part player now, or they're looking at other 19, 20-year-olds. So my time here is up. And I suppose Casemiro is kind of a good example of that. Could have stayed at Real Madrid, but wanted the challenge of Manchester United and was well compensated for it as well. So then at that point, even though it's purely hypothetical, it's impossible to predict specifics. But if he's had that 10 years wherever he goes, you can bet your bottom dollar that at 29 or 30, he's still going for 30 to 50 million, which is the same kind of price at the top end that Casemiro joined Manchester United for. So then if you're prepared to pay that 130 now, my point is, it isn't 130 because there's so many scenarios. If he stays and succeeds, he's maybe making you money. He's qualifying for Champions League by joining you. He's helping you win things. There's a commercial value and there's a football value. And if he goes longer down the line, that he's not leaving for zero. There's very few examples of that. You can look at Lukaku and say they signed him for 100 million. They've been forced to loan him. But even under that disaster mold a year on, they've still got a loan fee. If he has another loan, they'll get a second loan fee. And if he eventually has a permanent deal, they'll get another fee. So it's not 100 million lost. It's 100 million minus whatever you can recoup.
Yeah, and they'll probably bring about 60 million in total in for him. Maybe even more. Yeah, and if he has a brilliant season, they might. So yeah, I totally agree.
And this is factored in though to the projections, is all I'm saying. So it's not can you afford 130 million? It's can you afford the outlay of 130 million divided by your payment terms, divided by your projections of what the player will earn you, and in a worst case scenario, what you will recoup if he ever leaves.
I agree. And I run some numbers the other day, and they're basic numbers based on, I'm not factoring in every element of football. But essentially, I looked at the percentage growth in money in the game from 2004. And I used 2004 because that's when Wayne Rooney went for £27 million. And you look at what that would make Rooney worth in today's game. You look at the percentage growth. And Wayne Rooney, circa, would go for about £143 million deal in today's money. There were some really interesting ones in there, actually. If you look at when they were bought, how much TV money was being spent, the turnover of clubs at that time, and then you compare it to now. The likes of Francis Jeffers would be £72 million deals today. The likes of Sean Wright-Phillips is at 152 million pro rata. Equally, though, if you look at modern day deals and you work it backwards and look at the reduction, a Jack Grealish deal was around £22 million. And the reason I bring this up is not to say that the deals then weren't better value than deals now. It's just that the inflation in football outweighs the general inflation in real life. So when you see £130 million for a player today, it strikes you as astronomical. But we were spending that percentage of the money that clubs were turning over and the money that football was generating on players 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years ago. But it was just smaller amounts. So it didn't seem as huge and as massive. But I always remember my dad telling me that the same outrage that we see every few years, there's a new that the envelopes push further around the money people spend on players, and the same outrage happens every time. But my dad said that same outrage was there when Francis went for £1 million, the first £1 million player. There was, this is going to destroy football, that it's going to fall apart, you're going to kill the game, it's ridiculous, no one's worth £1 million. People and in another 20 years time, if football keeps growing at this rate financially, players will go for 300, 400, 500 million pound. But it's not really, it's just about how much money that TV companies essentially and viewers are willing to pay into football. It's just going to keep escalating. So I kind of feel a little bit like people are they're letting the word 100 million cloud their judgment, and not actually. If you go back 20 years and look at some of the biggest deals from those eras, it's around the ballpark you would pay for a top class young midfielder with the world at his feet that every single top club are fighting for. If you get where I'm coming from, it's not really a big deal for me. It's just, it's never contextualized in my opinion. But yeah, he's going to be a great signing wherever he goes. I think Bellingham, he looks the absolute real deal. He really, really does. Staying with Arsenal, new deals on the horizon for them. Two of their star players, William Saliba and Bukayo Saka. Do you see them being fairly simplistic deals for Arsenal to get done and get over the line?
Three, really, because Martinelli can be factored in as well. Arsenal are working on a trio of new deals, and all three are in imperious form for Arsenal. So let's start with Saliba, which is really intriguing. When we hit the early part of the window and Saliba had returned from his loan spell with Marseille, a lot of people questioned why Marseille were so intent on signing him on a permanent deal. And it was interesting, really, at the time, because there was outrage within Marseille, and there were lots of people at that football club that were very frustrated that they failed to make more of an effort to try and sign the player, because he had a really good season when he was on loan there. He played in 36 games in the league and he had 52 appearances in all competitions, and he was consistent and he was reliable and he was an elite level modern defender. And then when he returned back to Arsenal, I think that the starting point from many fans was, well, Gabriel and Ben White, they're fine. And now I think people realize how mature, how composed, how technical, and even at the other end, how dangerous William Saliba can be. But the challenge was always, when he returned, he was very happy at Marseille, and he was never sure what his exact role was going to be at Arsenal. And that conversation in pre-season between Arteta and Saliba was key, because Arteta made it clear to Saliba that he would play, that he would be integral, that he was valued, that he'd done enough on loan to walk into the Arsenal setup as an integral player. And now we're seeing that. But at the back of Saliba's mind, there is still that question as to whether, one, this will last. And I think based on what we've seen this season, the answer to that question is an emphatic yes. And two, who else is interested in him? And Arsenal have made painstaking efforts to convince Saliba that this is his long-term home. And Saliba and his agent are still deciding and leveraging other offers to try and get the best possible deal. But my understanding remains that because of how he's playing and because of Arteta specifically, that Saliba will sign a new deal at Arsenal. It's being worked on by Edu and everybody at Arsenal. They know how much of a priority this is. And it's all about convincing Saliba 100%. I'm not, by the way, saying he is unconvinced. I'm just saying that it's been quite a turbulent summer where Marseille and other clubs have definitely tried. And Arsenal have made it clear that nobody was meeting his valuation. And now it's a case of tying him down for the long term. And what the dynamics of that deal look like are going to take some time, because I think Saliba wants to push to get an elite level deal. So it's not just about signing, it's about elevating the personal terms to a point where he becomes a high earner and level with some of other integral players at Arsenal Football Club. And that might take a little bit of time, and he will leverage some other offers. And naturally, there's a fair amount of interest. And I think that the other factor in all of this is just, if he doesn't go to Marseille, but he enjoys France, what do PSG do in the long run? And we know, for example, that they've been chasing after Milan Skriniar at Inter, and they've been unable to get him. Are they going to pivot and perhaps decide that Saliba is someone on their radar? And I understand that they have been tracking him over the course of the summer. But make no mistake, Arsenal are very confident. It's not so much about the fact that Saliba doesn't want to instantly sign. I think Arteta has convinced him that Arsenal is the right place for him now, and he's playing. It's more about the specifics of how long is the deal going to be?
Yeah.
Is there any kind of out that could get him to France? And it wouldn't be Marseille, in my opinion. It would be PSG in the long term.
Yeah.
But in the short term, I think that Arsenal are very confident that they can get over the line. With Saka, I think he's untouchable in the long run. Manchester City and others would love him, but he will sign a new deal. I think there is nothing to suggest that that one will not get done. So there's no panic for Arsenal. Saka's going nowhere. Arsenal will get a new deal for Saka. He's very happy at Arsenal and is also playing really well. And then the interesting one is Martinelli, because nobody other than Kevin De Bruyne this season has created more phases that have led to chances. I think De Bruyne is in the 50s, and then in the late 30s, you've got Martinelli. And that is a real indicator in his position of a player being really involved and at his peak. And it's a very specific metric that the football geeks like, because it tells you that his involvement is leading, whether directly or indirectly, to shots on goal, to relevant chances created. And that tells you that he's part of the chemistry, he's part of the balance, he's part of the attacking phase. He's doing both heralded work and unsung work. And this is why he's on the radar of a number of clubs. And make no mistake, Chelsea are one of them. So Arsenal have got some work to do, because there will be a high volume of interest, but they're flying. They are on course Champions League football. At the moment, they're a genuine Premier League contender. So if you're any of those three players, there is absolutely no reason to consider a move away. And part of the reason why Martinelli and Saliba in particular will be linked with moves away is really just gamesmanship. It's about allowing it to be put out there that there is other interest to get the best possible deal. So if I was to rank them in terms of speed or likelihood of them being formally announced, and everything has worked concurrently, so this isn't the most scientific way of looking at it, but I would say there is a 100% chance, it is definite, that Saka will stay at Arsenal and will sign a new deal. I would say that it is highly, highly likely that Saliba will find a way to get a deal done. And I would say that Martinelli's head might be turned by one or two offers that come in. But again, I don't see any problems for Arsenal, because all three are playing at their peak. All three are in majestic form, and so are Arsenal. So unless anything changes in terms of Arsenal's Champions League chances, then they're in a great position. And the only intriguing aspect to all of this, if there's any doubt in the player's mind, is do you wait until January and then see where Arsenal are and then make a decision? Do you put a clause in the contract now that says if we don't make Champions League football, I'm allowed to leave? Or do you just sign and build on the momentum? And obviously only the players know the answer to that question. But that is the only thing that complicates it, really, that when you haven't got that history of week in, week out being at this form, Arsenal kind of flirted with it last season, but then had lulls. And when you haven't got the broader history as a club of being a Champions League automatic like Chelsea, that runs through a player's mind. What if I sign now and then things change? So it can be sensible, if you know the deal is there on the table, to just let the season run a little bit longer and then make absolutely sure that Champions League football is going to happen. And that might run through their mind as well. But Arsenal can be very, very confident. And I can confirm that they are actively and quite aggressively working on contract extensions for all three players.
Yeah, and I think for me, this is one of those things. I've been quite complimentary of Arsenal this year, much to the disdain of Man United fans that continually don't understand it. And I'm an unbiased person. I can't help it. But this, for me, is fundamental in them proving to their fans that they have changed their football club. And what I mean by that is, in the 90s, they had brilliant teams and they lost players and rejuvenated it, and they created the invincible side. I've felt since then, and you're talking nearly 20 years, they very rarely replace an outgoing star with a player who is as good in and around the same level. Secondly, they haven't been able to compete regularly at the highest level. So you also lose your star players, because at some point, Saliba and Saka, Martinelli and co are going to want to win league titles and Champions Leagues. That's what elite level footballers want to do. And I think getting them on new deals is key. But then continuing to invest in your squad, keeping yourselves like where they are right now. There's not a player in that Arsenal dressing room that's going to be thinking about going elsewhere. But you've got to maintain that and then win to keep this team together. Because I think the most soul-destroying thing for Gunners would be to like almost be there, but then the Cronkies don't quite keep investing enough to get them over the line, keep them at the highest level. And then, yes, they're signing new deals, but then in 2 years' time, 120, 130 million pound bid comes in, and Saliba wants to go to PSG and Martinelli wants to go to Real Madrid. I feel like Arsenal are big enough if they spend the right money on wages and keep investing in that squad to keep these players. And it's one thing in my opinion, we just haven't seen Arsenal do well enough in the last 15 or so years. And I think it's an area that they need to get right. Being top of the league and looking so good right now is one part of that. So it's going to be really intriguing to see the kind of direction this goes in and how it plays out over time. But on those players, Martinelli's brilliant. As we know, Saka, I've always thought is great. Saliba, I thought Saliba was going to be good, but the levels of quality he's showing for a centre-back of his age, quality on the ball, positional sense. He's also got that speed of recovery. So if he is slightly caught out, just like Van Dijk used to be able to do, Rio Ferdinand was brilliant at this. I'll put the afterburners on, the Yapstam, put the afterburners on, and I'm going to get there. He has all those attributes, and he really, he really could become the best centre-back in the world over the next 12 to 18 months. Even at this age, I really think he could do that. He's just so good. So, yeah, it's Arsenal, give him what the hell he wants and tie him down. Because at least then if he leaves, you're going to get a large amount of money you can reinvest. That's what you don't want to do, is have these players run these deals down, which is becoming popular in football, to run deals down so that players can definitely get their moves away. So, Gunners, get that tied down now. Get that done. Comment here from Finn. He says, Terry, your content is that good. I no longer watch Sky Sports News. I love that. That's brilliant. More to come. Keep up the great work. By the way, Ben, where did you get your jumper from?
This is a Zara classic bought in a half-price sale a couple of years ago. But sadly, because many people have criticized it, but one or two, perhaps in the minority, that score this an 11 out of 10 have asked me if they can still buy it. It's been discontinued. So it's a collector's item jumper now.
No. Oh, wow. There we go. Do you know what we should do? We should make this. We should do this for the terrace. We should make a little, people can buy a little Ben Jacobs doll that you put different jumpers on, like little toy jumpers. You can do
like
that.
Like a voodoo doll.
Yeah. And when you give transfer news they don't like, they can stick a pin in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you can do.
Instead of telling me to shut up, they can rip the head off the Ben Jacobs voodoo doll and they can stab it with pins.
Yeah, that's it. That'd be a laugh. You can buy them, and then when you're watching the shows at home, you can join in. I actually had the idea the other day of doing a show. I wouldn't do it with a professional like yourself, but it's like the idea is everyone's sitting there on a panel giving opinions, and when someone's giving an opinion the audience don't like, they get an electric shock. I thought it was a good concept for a show. I've just said it out loud now, so a big YouTube channel will probably steal it. But I thought that would be really, you have like a live audience, and when they don't like the opinion, they zap you. I thought that could be quite fun. Anyway, we digress massively. I wanted to just grab a quick update from you as well around some other players that may be looking at kind of January moves. James Maddison being one of them.
Yeah, I mean, James Maddison is in incredible form, isn't he, for Leicester? 5 goals already this season. Brilliant free kick against Nottingham Forest, and he just bossed that entire game. Goals, assists. So naturally, he's there in the shop window. And because Leicester have sold Wesley Fofana, they don't have a necessity to bring in a transfer fee for James Maddison, but the finances of Leicester are still not overly healthy. And it's a challenge for Brendan Rodgers, because on the one hand, if you sell James Maddison plus the Fofana fee, you could have freedom in the market. And in the long term, you could bring in players that are going to stay at Leicester. Or you could stick with James Maddison, but still know that he's highly, highly likely to leave in the summer, or certainly within the next few windows. And that's just because Leicester are not likely to have European football come the end of this season. And they're certainly not likely to have Champions League football. If in seasons gone by, instead of losing Champions League football in back-to-back seasons on the final day, they'd have got Champions League football, it could have been a completely different story. So Leicester's perspective is still they'd like to offer James Maddison a new deal. And what I love about James Maddison is that he's not let Leicester's form or the speculation impact him at all. It was very telling that Brendan Rodgers, during the close of the window, said openly that Youri Tielemans and Wesley Fofana's heads were not right. And there was James Maddison just going about his business and doing everything possible to get Leicester out of trouble and to get himself into the England setup. And I was watching Sky Sports, and Gary Neville flagged something that he saw. He didn't suggest this personally, but he saw it around, if James Maddison gets in the England setup, he'll be a bit of a passenger. He'll be the 18th man, and that will reflect poorly on the dressing room because of his character. That was the suggestion that was made. And I think that is an absolutely disgraceful suggestion to make, because I've come across James Maddison lots, and never have I seen that. Perhaps when he joined Leicester from Norwich, there was a swagger and an ego from a young player that was apparent on and off the field. But now all James Maddison does is have fun on and off the football field. He's a brilliant character. He's honest. He's charismatic. He's eloquent. He's now consistent on the football field. And he is an extraordinarily positive influence in that Leicester City dressing room. Everything that James Maddison does reflects well at the moment on James Maddison and on Leicester City Football Club. So if he gets a deserved England call-up and he doesn't play a game, he will love it. It will be a dream for him to be at a World Cup, whether he plays or whether he just sits on the bench. And I think to suggest otherwise is hugely disrespectful to James Maddison's professionalism. And when you watch him speak to the media, when you watch him play, he is doing everything to suggest that he can be a box office footballer for a big club. So then where does this future lie? Well, if he doesn't sign a new deal at Leicester, or even if he does, of course, to protect the value, as I said before, Newcastle are still very much interested. They felt like 45 million was about as high as they wanted to go. And Leicester's valuation was 60 million. I say was, past tense, because now it will be even higher. And I think Newcastle's challenge, a bit like Manchester United with Bellingham, is if they went for Maddison in January, then can they guarantee Maddison a likelihood of European football? And the answer is obviously no, because Newcastle are not going to be comfortably within the top 4 or the top 6. They'll be there or thereabouts, of course, but you never know what's going to happen in the second half of the season. And Maddison is playing too well, almost to the point where Newcastle could become bypassed in this conversation. And that's kind of good news for Leicester in January as well, because if I was James Maddison, I would keep doing what I was doing. And if he went to the World Cup and shone, he puts himself in the shop window, but he can wait until the summer, play well for Leicester, and then wait for a club to come in for him, maybe like a Spurs with Champions League football. There's no need for Maddison to rush to Newcastle. He waits until the summer, I believe, only my personal opinion, if he's sensible, unless someone with Champions League football virtually guaranteed wants him in January, wait until the summer. And then I will be staggered if he continues this form. If a Tottenham, if a Chelsea, if somebody with Champions League football, Arsenal, who knows? I'm just banding names around. Tottenham are really the only one of those three that have seriously considered James Maddison, just to be clear. But someone will come along with Champions League football because he is that good. So Maddison can be patient here, and he should, in my opinion, go to Qatar. There's lots of arguments here because you could say, well, who's he going to replace? And the most natural name is Mason Mount, and I think he's in better form than Mason Mount. You have to take Phil Foden. You have to take Saka. So unless you're leaving out someone in another position to bolster that area, but Maddison can't be a defensive-minded player. He can't play fullback, but he's got versatility of position. So I think it's a like-for-like decision at the moment between Mount or Maddison, and I can understand arguments for both. And the challenge with Maddison is that because he's not, as he should have been, being called up during the final games, Gareth Southgate hasn't worked with him as much, and that may count against him. But if you're judging it on form, in a straight decision between, let's just say, Mount and Maddison, I personally would take James Maddison. And Gareth Southgate may say, well, I've worked more with Mount. I have played with him more behind closed doors. I've seen a longer-term consistency from Mount. But it's absolutely clear right now that Maddison is in much better form than Mason Mount, which is why a lot of people feel that Maddison should go in Mount's place. Final thing I would say on England specifically is just you also have to appreciate there's a different role. So everything you see that James Maddison does for Leicester, he won't necessarily have the chance to do for England because he's not going to be taking every set piece for England comparative to Leicester. So that's another factor. It's kind of annoying in many respects because there shouldn't be that hierarchy or that pecking order. But when you gather the best English set piece takers, when you gather those that are the most versatile and can have the most freedom on the football field, when you gather players that can play wide or central and they're all together, there have to be more rigid lanes. And that might count against Maddison because it's all very well seeing him bang in a great free kick for Leicester against Nottingham Forest. But if you got that free kick for England, and he was in the squad and on the field, who is taking it ahead of him? And that might count against him in some ways as well. But the short answer, not that I ever give a short answer, partly because I want you to be watching me and the jumper 24/7 as I ramble on about James Maddison. But I think the short answer is that Maddison is on form worthy by miles of an England call-up. But I still think that Gareth Southgate might pick Mason Mount above him.
There we go. I think he deserves a call up. And there was a comment from one of our viewers, I miss it now, from Twisted, who said, why? Twisted loves a weird question, but he basically said, why does everybody deserve Champions League football? Bizarre narrative. Well, not everybody does, and there isn't a claim. The only time you hear someone say X deserves Champions League football is when they're performing at a very high and consistent level in the hardest league in the world. And what we as football fans mean by this is two things. One, the player wants to test himself at Champions League football, and their form suggests that they deserve an opportunity. We're not turning around and saying Lee Catamol deserves Champions League football because he was a stalwart of the Premier League. So that would be my response to that. Listen, Ben, always a pleasure to speak to you, my friend.
Can I just say one more thing before we go, which I think is really important?
Oh, yeah, go on.
My condolences to the Tottenham family. Gian Piero, the fitness coach at Spurs, sadly passed away age 61 from leukemia. And I came across him a few times, a really lovable character. He was nicknamed the Marine. He had a reputation for pushing players to the extreme, and often they would end up throwing up as well as they went through their paces during pre-season. But there was so much respect at Tottenham and love as well. So don't be fooled by the Marine nickname. It wasn't boot camp. There was a very modern scientific approach to how the fitness regime was carried out, and that extends, of course, to Juventus. And let's not forget, he was with Lippi as well when Italy won the 2006 World Cup. But I just had so much respect from coming across him, and also from what I heard from those within the game, because he had this very regimented approach, but it was also very specific. And he was extremely quick to use science and adapt his methods to get the best out of players. And you won't find anybody at Tottenham who tells you that he wasn't soft and loved away from that training regime. But then as soon as you got into the actual fitness aspect, you were put through your paces to the absolute extreme, and he will be greatly missed. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to extend my warmest and most sincere condolences to everybody affected by this, everyone within the Spurs family, the Italy and Juve groups as well, where he worked too, and of course his own family as well. Really, really sad news. And I'm sure that Tottenham will pay their respects during their next game as well. But personally, I was so saddened to hear that news earlier today, and I know that there's a lot of Tottenham fans that are in the chat as well. So again, I just wanted to extend my deepest condolences before we finish today.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't actually aware of that news this morning. I just searched it while you were talking. Yeah, they're terribly, terribly sad. So yeah, of course, huge heartfelt condolences to him, his family, and everybody connected to Tottenham. Ben, always a pleasure to speak to you, my friend, no doubt about it. Viewers, you're legends as always. Please hit like buttons, subscribe, hit the bell notification button as well before you leave. We're back live today after both Man United and Arsenal's Europa League games for match reactions. So make sure you're joining us live. But until next time, take care of yourselves. Goodbye. God bless. And we'll see you all again soon.